Our speaker today is Dr. Mark Yarbrough. He is our president, and he began his tenure as the sixth president of DTS on July 1st of 2020. He also serves as professor of Bible exposition. Along with his responsibilities of leading DTS, he travels extensively, leading tours and speaking at conferences. Mark has authored several books, including How to Read the Bible Like a Seminary Professor, Jonah, Beyond the Tale of a Whale, and Tidings of Comfort and Joy. He has been married for over 30 years to Jennifer, his high school sweetheart. They have 4 adult children, 1 son-in-law, and they reside in Sunnyvale, Texas. Will you join me today in welcoming our president to chapel?
Well, good morning. It is so good to see you all today, and I love the beginning of a new semester, don't you? You know, I love it because you haven't read your syllabus too much, and there's hope. Everything looks really good at this stage in the game, and we all know that it's a long journey, but it's a journey that is so worth it. I'm going to talk today about 3 marks of faith, but it's an interesting passage in Luke chapter 17. Those of you that know me know that I collect just really strange, weird things. And one of the things that I have collected for decades are exam answers. Now, some of you get worried right there because it's not exam answers from Dallas Theological Seminary students, okay? That would be illegal for me to do that. But I love, exams that kids have taken. Okay, some of you have seen these, and I've got thousands of them. I like this one right here. There's a math one. The difference between 180 and 158 is, and the answer is, 22? But teachers always want to know how you got your answers. I never did like that when I was a kid. So this kid answered it this way. Explain how you found your answer. It's math. Isn't that right? Just going to get it out there. I don't know, this one must have been a history class or something because it's fascinating. Draw a picture of what you will look like in 100 years. In 100 years, so let's say a little kid right there. Warren just had it all figured out. I'm not going to be around in 100 years. Okay, this was an art class, and there's a boat, and so it's, can you draw this ship? And the little kid looked at it and just said, no. Not going to do it. It's pretty good. Okay, here we go. Here's another one. I like this one. Another one of these word problems. There are 300 students in year 10, Mary and Mark. Mary and Mark want to find out year 10's favorite color. Mary asks 30 people. Mark asks 150 people. Mark says, my conclusions are more likely to be reliable than Mary's. Why does Mark think he is right? And this young lady said this, because Mark is a man. Come on, friends. It's okay. You're like, that's not PC. I get it. And it's just have a little fun. It's all right. Okay, here's another one. Draw a plant cell. This was like a science class. A plant cell, right? And its cells look differently. Draw a plant cell and identify its most important parts. Here we go. A plant cell. Notice the important parts. No windows and iron bars. I don't think that's what they were talking about. Okay, last one. Here we go. This one was, who is your hero? I love this little kid right there. Look at what they put. Dad. Go ahead and say it. Oh, that's good. Why do you consider this person your hero? And they filled in the blank. I love it. He is brave. Do it again. Say, oh, that's great. Is there anything your hero is frightened of? Mom. That's right. You got it right there. Well, some of you may be thinking about tests right now as you're starting your semester and you're looking into classes, all of the courses you're taking, and you're mapping everything out. It's what I did. I can remember those days very clearly, planning ahead, thinking about what is still in front of me. You know, it's interesting that in the Gospels, Jesus is always kind of given the disciples tests. But it wasn't a fill in the blank, it was a test of life and living. And Jesus is carrying out illustrations and he's doing things and he's longing for them to see what it is that he's doing. One of those things that we see, and Luke does this masterfully in his gospel, Jesus has these episodes, and Luke records them in a way to show us really what Jesus is longing for in his disciples. In Luke chapter 17 in particular, I want to look at a few verses, 11 through 19 here as we start our time together this semester. And Jesus has this episode that occurs where he's making a journey, and we're going to watch this unfold, but the disciples are in the background, and they're watching this unfold in front of their eyes. And it's this account that you have read many, many times where Jesus is heading to Jerusalem, but he engages these individuals that have leprosy. And in the background, I think Jesus is letting this illustrative moment in life unfold in front of his disciples, and he's really kind of reminding them of the kind of faith that he longs to see in their lives. They're the ones that have been close to him. They've been walking with Jesus. They have seen some of the things that he's done, and they're going to see something new and afresh in this one. But in this little passage, it flows nicely. And I want us to join the disciples in seeing 3 marks of faith that please the Lord. And I think we're going to see how it applicationally even challenges us in our walk of faith of what Jesus wants to see in us as well. The first one is this. The first mark of faith that pleases the Lord is a faith that asks. A faith that asks. Please turn, if you will, to Luke chapter 17. I'm going to start in at verse 11. It says this, "Now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. As he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him. They stood at a distance and they called out in a loud voice, 'Jesus, Master, have pity on us.'" This little story gets moving really quick. You see what it says. Now, on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee. Now, there's been a lot of commentators that have talked about the fact that Jesus could have gone different ways, but there is no doubt in the text, we're supposed to see that Jesus is following a border area. Now, we know the story. I'm not going to give you all the details of that, of Samaria and who the Samaritans were. But Jesus is traveling down to Jerusalem so that he can always go up to Jerusalem, as you know. But it's this encounter that we see here. He is making this journey, traveling along the border between Samaria and Galilee. And as he was going into a village, notice that it doesn't tell us what village it is, doesn't give the name. It's not important to the story at this stage in the game. Jesus is making a journey and he goes into a village, and 10 men who had leprosy met him. That means we get to stop and talk about leprosy. It's not something that I talk about every day. I don't think about leprosy unless I'm passing it in the Bible. Leprosy is mentioned in both the Old Testament and the New Testament. And there are encounters that we have with individuals that had leprosy. Now, you know that according to the Jewish law, according to the Mosaic Code, and you can go back and read on your own in Leviticus chapter 13 and in Numbers chapter 5, that there are very explicit instructions, even in the Old Testament, for individuals that had leprosy. Here's what I think it's important for us to think through as we're seeing this. Individuals that had leprosy were ostracized from culture. Now, the word that's used here can be anything from a simple skin disease to individuals that had just horrific forms of leprosy that would deaden your sensitivity to digits and to limbs, and individuals were covered in that. But what we need to see is that they were moved out of culture. They were moved out of society and life. They could no longer be with their families, with their friends. Can you imagine what that was like to come down with that disease and you knew what it meant? It meant that you were moved out and away from everyone that you loved, that you longed to be with. You could never be around again unless God did a miracle. These individuals had bonded together. Now, this spoiler alert, but you know what happens at the end of this. We find out that at least one of these individuals is a Samaritan. The other 9 are Jewish individuals, correct? We already know that if you know this passage, and we'll see it at the end. I find this fascinating that Jews and Samaritans did not get along, and there's a long, drawn-out history for that. But they didn't get along, but here in the midst of their brokenness, these 10 individuals came together, and they bonded with that, didn't they? That's fascinating to me, that the bonding always comes in the common denominator of our brokenness. And that's exactly what occurs here. Here are these 10 individuals. They see Jesus coming, and notice again what the text says. As he was going into the village, the 10 men who had leprosy met him, and the text says that they stood at a distance. And they called out in a loud voice, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." Now, there's no doubt that they had heard who this Jesus was, this Galilean miracle worker. That they had heard of things that he had done. I don't know if they knew that he was making that journey that day. It doesn't say. But somehow, some way, they recognized him. Word on the street had gone in front. And when they saw that it was Jesus, they looked to him. Notice what they do. They ask him, "Jesus, Master, have pity on us." Friends, the simple fact that they looked to Jesus and they asked him. Of all the things maybe that they could have done, they looked to Jesus. They asked him. Now, it made complete sense. Talk to me. What is it that they were asking for? Come on, this isn't rocket science here. They're asking to be healed. I mean, they're all bandaged up. They haven't been with their family. They are looking to Jesus and asking him for help. You know, it's fascinating to me. I've learned this in my life that you ever notice that you get really spiritual when you're in the ditch? Anybody with me on that? When does your prayer life go up? And all of God's people said amen. That's right. Yeah, when we're in the pressure cooker, right? When it all falls apart. I mean, some of you know this. I'm not going to go into a long story about it. I had a major issue back in the last fall. My back had a torn disc, and it was a horrible moment in my life. And I'd never physically hurt like I had hurt. And I realized how spoiled I have been in that regard. But you know what? God taught me something in that moment. And I have never appreciated this about the Lord. And I mean that with reverence. But, you know, God teaches us an awful lot through pain. I promise you, I would just rather read a book about it, right? Anybody with me on that? I would rather not have to go through an experience to finally get my eyes and turn them up on Jesus. I think there's a very simple message here that we dare not miss. We need to look to Jesus for all things. See, right now, even here at the beginning of the semester, where optimism just is exuberant. We're all excited, and we should be. I mean, even professors, we're all jazzed up about teaching. We've got our information, but we know there's a big, long journey ahead. Here's the reality for every one of us. Man, when problems start cropping up, and all of a sudden when the syllabi really kind of crunch, and we've got a lot in front of us, you know, all of a sudden that's when we start doing things either we shouldn't, we start having perspectives that are not the perspective that we have right now, and all of a sudden there is a beckoning that God's saying, hey, I've been here all along. Please look to me. Come right here. I'm making a journey with you. I don't want to miss the simple message, especially for those of you out here that are fixers, and you know who you are. Pull yourself up by the bootstraps. It's the same position that we should always be in. I find myself there when I find myself in brokenness. Mark Yarbrough looked to Jesus for all things. I love what these lepers did. They looked to Jesus. Second thing that we see here, a mark of faith that pleases the Lord is a faith that responds. They cry out to Jesus. And here's what verse 14 says. It says this, when he saw them, he said, go show yourselves to the priests. Now let's just stop there for a minute. When he saw them, he said, go show yourselves to the priests. You know, I don't know, I can't prove this to you, but I bet you these guys were like standing there, right? At a distance. They'd cried out to Jesus, and the first response is Jesus says, go show yourselves to the priests. I bet you they kind of stood there for a while. Anybody bet that with me? Kind of standing there, kind of looking at one another like we're waiting for Jesus to do what only Jesus can do, that we've heard that Jesus did for others, and we want him to do whatever he's going to do, but he hadn't done it yet. And they're standing there, and they're kind of looking down probably at their skin diseases. I don't know if one of them kind of got the bandage and started unwrapping it to look. And we're happy to go, Jesus, but there's one little problem here. You haven't done anything yet. I don't know how long they stood there. The text doesn't say. But somewhere along the way, I'm sure one of them in that little huddle of sadness starts looking and goes, well, he said go. We better go. You going to go? I'll go if you go. Let's go together. I mean, that is what he said. And they had to process that. And here's what the text says. Look at it. It says, and as they went, they were cleansed. As they went, they were cleansed. I have learned, this is not always true, but sometimes blessings follow obedience. In this case, these individuals were asked to have that kind of faith that doesn't just ask, but that responds in obedience. Now here's what I love, because some of you, especially our new students, I've had a privilege of talking with you, engaging with you, and some of you are here because you have responded in obedience. And you're not quite sure what God is going to do ahead. In fact, some of you may be asking, you're like going, I'm kind of waiting for the blessing. Sometimes it may last for a long time before God makes clear what it is that he longs for from us. But what I do know, friends, is that he wants a heart that submits. And when it is a heart of submission and we faithfully follow, that's where he wants us. I love this language. I wish I could have been there in this. I told you for years I've thought about if you're Star Trek fans, I'm just a believer that God's going to have the holodeck at some point in the future. This is one of those moments I want to go back and watch it unfold. I have no idea. Can you imagine being there and these guys all of a sudden they just start walking together? Okay, we're going to go show ourselves to who? The priests. Now the priests were part of the healthcare system of the day. They were the ones that could give clearance for someone to enter back into life and to culture and to be with their family. So in hope, these guys start walking off together. Again, the text does not tell us, were they 100 yards away? Were they half a mile? How far down the road had they gone? And all of a sudden, they began to walk and look. Don't you wish you could have been there at that moment? I don't know who it was, but one of them looks down and goes, whoa, everybody stop. And they start looking, and all of a sudden the bandages start coming off, and maybe the foot that had no more feeling, and he's like, I can feel my big toe again. I mean, I have no idea what the jubilation was, but the text says, as they went, they were cleansed. The kind of faith that pleases God is a faith that looks to Jesus and asks. The kind of faith that pleases God is a faith that responds in obedience. But the kind of faith that also pleases God, and this is many ways where this story is going, it's a faith that says, thank you. Look at this. One of them, when he saw that he was healed, he came back praising God. In a loud voice, he threw himself at Jesus' feet and he thanked him. And here's a little bit of a punchline. And he was a Samaritan. I grew up at a wonderful little church, and I'm always telling stories about this little church. My mom and dad are here. My father was a bivocational pastor. And we had this church that had this radical idea. They had this thing called Sunday school. And all the little kids went to Sunday school, and it was just this beautiful place to grow up. And I sincerely mean that. And, we would be in our classes, and Brother Marvin Evans, would press the button, and there was a little, and that dismissed all the kids. And we lined up, and we all walked out together, and we sat in these things called pews. They're relics. They're in the Smithsonian. You can go see them. Pews, and we would sit there, all the little kids, and we could call out our favorite songs. And so Mark Yarbrough would raise his hand because I had my favorite songs. And I would ask the song leader to lead my favorite song. And here's the one because I'm going to sing it to you, so get ready, okay? And it went like this. Listen. There was 1, 2, 3 lepers healed by Christ. There was 4, 5, 6 lepers healed by Christ. There was 7 and 8, and 9 healed too. 10 in all were made brand new. But 1, just 1, only 1 turned to say, Thank you. I can remember hearing that song as a little kid. I had no idea it came out of Luke chapter 17. Perfectly honest, I actually thought it was a song about leopards, But that's a whole nother story. But I do know that it was a call to give thanks based upon what God had done. Look at what it says. This one individual who was a Samaritan, knowing that he'd been healed, came back and threw himself at Jesus' feet, and he thanked him. Verse 17 goes on and says, Jesus asked, and by the way, there's 3 questions here that Jesus asked. Look at this. Were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Has no one returned to give praise to God except this foreigner? Then he said to him, Rise and go. Your faith has made you well, according to the way the NIV has phrased this. I love these invitations from Jesus. But he asks these questions and lays them in front of the one individual that came back, that had the right heart, that did the right thing. And he asked the question again, were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? It's interesting, isn't it, that God longs to see a heart of praise from those that he has blessed. Hey, would you do me a favor? Would you raise your hand if you've been blessed by God? Hey, everybody just look around the room. If your hand's not up, you're a liar. Yeah, my friends, we have been blessed in so many ways. You know what I hope here at the beginning of this semester? I hope that we don't lose the joy of our salvation. We need to say it over and over and over again. We have been saved by grace through faith. And this not of ourselves. It is a gift of God so that no one can boast. I was reading again yesterday a familiar passage. And I love this one. You know it in Galatians chapter 4. But when the set time had fully come, God sent his Son, born of a woman, born under the law, to redeem those under the law so that they might receive what? Adoption. Have you been adopted into the family of God? Yes? Friends, if you're a believer in the Lord Jesus Christ, you have been. Anybody with me love adoption stories? Anybody? And I know some of you in this room because you are adoptees and you have adopted. And I've got friends all over the world that have adoption stories from every tongue, tribe, people, and nation. Some dear friends in Ethiopia that have an adoption ministry and they're working on that. I tell you what, when you hear stories of adoption, it moves your heart in a very interesting way. I was watching a video of an adoption that I want you to watch, and I hope it moves you.
All right, well, there's one more gift.
We have one more gift.
It's not from Grammy, but it's another gift. Why don't you, careful, open it up. There we go. I want you to read it.
I'm going to be adopted?
We love you, sweetheart. We'll always be your
I
parents.
love you so much. I love you.
We love you, sweetheart. We'll always be your parents. Okay? We'll always be your real family.
I'm going to take care of you, protect you, and Kai and Lisa too. I love you so much. Can you believe it? God is too good.
Did you hear the words at the end? You may have missed it through the tears. She said, "Can you believe it? God is so good." I want to be that little girl. That's who we are. We're in a position of individuals that have been adopted. I love this story from Luke 17, the language that is used there at the end. When Jesus wraps it all up, he then said to him, "Rise and go. Your faith has made you well." It's not the individual's faith. It was faith in who Jesus is and what Jesus has done. And what God is reminding me, and I hope he reminds you of it, is that I need to be a child of God, one that has been adopted into his family, of giving thanks. And shame on me in my life when that is not reflected in everything that I say and do. I was reading a story of Spurgeon, and he was telling the story of sharing the gospel with a very talkative person. And he said they kept asking questions, and they had a million things. And at the end of the jabber, he said, I love this. He said, they said these words, "Mr. Spurgeon, if this gospel of grace is true and God saves me, he will never hear the end of it." And I thought, that is so true. I want to have a faith like these 10 lepers that goes to Jesus with everything, responds when Jesus says go, but certainly lives a life that says, thank you, Lord Jesus. We need to be a campus, friends, that's different than the world, that gripes and barks and complains and thinks about what it doesn't have. That should not be our story. We are privileged students to get to study. I know you're going, man, Mark, I'm paying a lot of money for this. I understand that. It's still a gift. Faculty, we are privileged to get to do what we do. Staff, we're all in this together. We're doing it for another generation. And may that roll off our lips to continually sing about the goodness